Dawn in Silver Creek always arrived slowly, as if the sun itself wanted to linger in the rare silence of this peaceful suburb. But for Mark Calloway, those first rays of light were always upstaged by a living alarm clock named Luke. There was no need for an alarm, no need for anyone to call him. He had long grown used to the warm sensation on the back of his hand each morning, a damp, gentle tongue, and a soft breath tinged with the scent of fresh grass from the night before. When Mark opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was not the sunlight spilling in through the window, but a pair of deep brown eyes, intelligent, quiet, and brimming with that strange affection only a dog who has weathered countless storms alongside a human can possess. Luke didn't bark, nor did he bounce around like other dogs. He simply stood there, muzzle softly touching his owner's hand, a subtle reminder. "It's time, Commander," Mark chuckled, his laugh gravelly with age and experience. He gently stroked Luke's head. The fur around the dog's muzzle had turned silver, but his eyes were still sharp, still the loyal young soldier he'd always been. "Old soldier, right on time again, aren't you?" Mark murmured, as if afraid to wake the entire world. The adventures of youth were now behind Mark. His days were quieter, mornings slower, the kind where he and Luke were the only two left to guard old habits and memories. To Mark, Luke wasn't just a friend or companion. He was a living link to the past, a past filled with men who had once shared a foxhole, now distilled to a single dog who could never speak the language of humans. Mark sat up, his joints creaking. Luke picked up his old leash, holding it gently in his mouth, leading the way like a professional bodyguard. He knew every brick, every corner of the house, and could even press the automatic gate button outside, a trick Mark had taught him as a pup. In the pale morning light, Luke's ashen fur glimmered like a faded suit of armor, and Mark watched him with the pride of an old father. The yard wasn't large, but for Luke, every square foot bore his paw prints. The base of the old oak where he'd stand watch when Mark was away. The little nook in the wall where Mark hid a bone for him after each evening spent watching TV together. Luke made a circuit around the yard, checking that all was well. Then, as always, he returned to sit beside the famous old Harley Davidson, head held high, posture confident, but humble. That Harley was a part of the family's soul. Mark had kept it for over 30 years. Every scratch on the bike was tied to a distant journey, to times he'd taken Luke out to the fields for a run when he was just a pup. Now the bike was old, its owner older still, but Luke remained unchanged, the steadfast sentry he'd always been. Mark looked at Luke and wondered how many times in his life someone had ever waited for him with such unwavering loyalty. Sometimes he thought, if one of his old foxhole buddies could come back, they'd sense in Luke that same never abandon a comrade spirit that every true soldier carries for life. He shrugged on his leather jacket and smoothed the handkerchief his mother had given him back in the war. A small ritual, a reminder of where he'd come from. Luke waited by the bike, never taking his eyes off his owner, not for a single moment. As Mark slipped on his helmet, he called out, almost absent-mindedly, "Ready, Sergeant?" The shepherd didn't answer, just wagged his tail, his eyes glowing with an unbreakable trust. Mark tapped the seat behind him, and Luke jumped up with the practiced ease of a warrior trained all his life. His tail brushed lightly against Mark's back, as if to say, "I'm here, Commander. Don't worry." The village was just waking up in peace. When Mark started the Harley, the engine's roar blended with the bird song of early morning. Luke sat still, calm and poised, ready for the next adventure, even if it was just a ride around Silver Creek, along the same roads they'd traveled 1,000 times. For Mark and Luke, each day was a new life. If anyone ever asked Mark about the loneliness of old age, he would shake his head. As long as he woke each morning with a friend who didn't need words, a soldier who never left his post. Like Luke, every trace of loneliness turned into meaning, and so it went, as the soft golden light touched the rooftops. Two silhouettes, an old man and a quiet gray dog, walked through the dawn together, starting a new day just like every day before, and yet as if for the very first time. The Harley's engine blended with the steady rhythm of the dawn, carrying two old soldiers slowly away from the familiar red dirt road toward the center of Silver Creek. Mist lingered along the roadside trees, settling on Mark's shoulders with a chill that was both bracing and clear-headed. Behind him, Luke sat straight, ears always perked forward like antennae, catching every faint disturbance in the world around them. For Mark, these rides were a simple ritual, cruising through quiet streets, past fields of lush green wheat, feeling the wind ruffle his silver hair and the gentle pressure of Luke's paws leaning against his back. These moments, seemingly ordinary, held a universe of memories and comfort. They were the best remedy for a loneliness he once thought he'd gotten used to. As Mark shifted gears, about to turn onto the main road, his phone vibrated. The name Harper Calloway lit up on the screen. His daughter, now a captain, commanding a special unit at a base dozens of miles away. In Mark's life, only two things made him truly proud: his years serving his country and raising Harper into a strong, principled woman, steadfast as a river that never flows backward. He turned on his Bluetooth headset, hands still steady on the handlebars. "Good morning, Captain Calloway. Is it time to check on the old man again?" On the other end, Harper's voice was gentle yet firm, as always. "Where are you headed this morning, Dad?" "Same as every Sunday for the past 40 years. Luke and I are doing our rounds through Silver Creek, then out to the countryside." Harper sighed, worry coloring every word. "Dad, stay away from the road near Redstone Bridge, okay? I've heard the town police have been cracking down lately, not too friendly to outsiders. There've been a few random stops." Mark laughed, trying to reassure her. "I'm just an old guy on a Harley. They won't pay attention to me, especially with Luke along." "That's what worries me. What do strangers see? An old black man riding an expensive bike with a big shepherd that looks like a K9. Sometimes that's all it takes for trouble to find you, Dad. You know that." Mark fell silent for a beat. Harper was always clear-eyed, facing reality head-on, something he sometimes tried to ignore just to keep life a little lighter. "Be careful, Dad. Call me when you get home. I promise." Their short conversation ended, but Harper's warning echoed in Mark's mind. He glanced at Luke in the rearview mirror, noticing the dog was still sitting upright, but his ears were suddenly stiff, as if drawn by some invisible sound. The road into Silver Creek was unusually quiet that morning. When they were just about 100 meters from the "Welcome to Silver Creek" sign, Luke suddenly sprang up, his front paws pressing against Mark's shoulders. For the first time in years, Mark heard Luke's bark, no longer steady but broken, deep, punctuated by a short, low howl, the kind of sound he'd only ever made on stormy nights, or when something was truly out of the ordinary. Mark slowed down, worried, looking back at Luke. "What's wrong, Luke?" Of course, Luke didn't answer, but his eyes were wide, staring straight ahead, toward a curve hidden by old trees. Instinct honed by years together told Mark. Luke never barked like that for just a stray cat or a squirrel. It was an alarm, a warning, something only soldiers who've lived through danger could recognize. Unease crept into Mark's muscles. He gripped the handlebars tighter, easing off the throttle. Even the morning wind seemed to go silent, every sense on edge, tuned to each slight movement from Luke behind him. Years of fighting side by side had taught Mark one thing: never ignore your comrade's intuition, whether they're human or a dog. Especially with Luke, a friend without words, but who senses the world in a way no one else can. Mark whispered, his hand quietly resting on Luke's head, searching for reassurance for them both. "It's all right, isn't it, partner?" But the air stayed cold, and up ahead, flashes of blue uniforms appeared through the trees, revealing a bend in the road Mark could not predict, but one that Luke, with the instincts of a true soldier, seemed to have sensed long before. The morning air in Silver Creek grew thick as Mark slowed the bike, his hand resting lightly on Luke's neck. A silent reassurance for them both, On either side of the road, the thin mist still hadn't lifted, draping the landscape in a hazy veil that made everything seem more distant than usual. But the blue uniforms ahead grew clearer. Two men standing beside a gleaming white patrol car pulled back onto the grass verge. As soon as the sound of the Harley reached them, the blond officer, face cold and posture full of entitlement, narrowed his eyes. Those eyes tracked not only Mark, but also swept over the large shepherd sitting upright behind him, as if searching for something out of place in this quiet morning. Next to him stood a younger man, skin a bit darker, his face uncertain, his eyes darting between his partner and the road ahead. Silver Creek's people still weren't used to seeing him, and this morning he hadn't had time to steel himself for the tension that sometimes seeped into this seemingly peaceful town. The blond officer, Jason Brennan, leaned toward the car window, suspicion and prejudice thinly veiled in his gaze. He lowered his voice, almost whispering to his colleague. "Black guy, nice bike, canine dog, you see that? Something's off here." The short remark, meant to be private, was heavy with meaning. It wasn't just a personal judgment, but the product of decades spent viewing life through a lens of suspicion, a habit that small, isolated towns in America sometimes nurture without even naming. Eddie Dawson, the new officer in Silver Creek, glanced slowly from Mark to Brennan. For a moment, his lips moved as if to say something, but in the end, he simply shrugged, silent, letting his partner's words flow past as if they were the natural order. He didn't agree, but lacked the resolve to object. And that silence, however small, would set events in motion neither of them could have foreseen. Brennan stepped away from the car, adjusting his gun belt, his eyes fixed on Mark, a calm, older black man riding a vintage Harley with steady hands, a large, broad-chested shepherd with a gleaming dark coat seated behind. In the pale morning light, Luke's fur seemed almost luminous, making him stand out all the more. A noble presence, never fierce, nothing like the impression Brennan was ready to project. Luke sat motionless, ears standing tall, eyes wary, locked onto Brennan. Where an ordinary person might see just a big dog, anyone who'd ever fought alongside a companion would recognize Luke's on guard bearing. That of a true soldier, ready to protect his owner from any danger, visible or hidden. Mark felt the wave of tension ripple down his spine. He was long accustomed to those scrutinizing stares, but forced himself to stay calm, reminding himself of the patience and composure he'd learned in the service. His hand tensed slightly, giving Luke's neck a gentle pat, as if to say, "Stay calm, partner." When Brennan raised his hand to signal Mark to stop, Luke's gaze grew fiercer. A low growl rumbled in his throat, just loud enough for his owner to sense. A primal warning that something was about to cross the line of the ordinary. Mark sighed, trying to keep his voice as natural as possible as he brought the bike to a halt, and reached back to gently stroke Luke's head. "Easy, buddy. It's all going to be all right." But somewhere inside, both Mark and Luke knew. From the moment that patrol car appeared up ahead, this Sunday ride had ceased to be just another routine journey. The morning air seemed to freeze, as if even time itself was holding its breath, waiting for something inevitable to happen. Mark stopped the bike as ordered, the Harley's kickstand scraping the dew-damp pavement, his eyes quietly fixed on the two officers ahead. A scene he'd encountered somewhere in his long soldier's life, but never wanted to see again in the everyday world. He took off his helmet, carefully raising both hands in front of him so every movement was clear. At his age, Mark knew, even the smallest gesture had to be deliberate. Slowly, Mark, just like the checkpoints back in the war. Pressed close to his side, Luke never took his eyes off the men in front. His ears stood tall, brown eyes under dark brows gleaming with an uneasy instinct that had no name. His chest rose and fell with tense breaths, ash-gray fur brushing lightly against Mark's leg. A silent transfer of strength. Jason Brennan, the blond officer with the cold edge, stepped away from the patrol car. Brennan moved closer, eyes full of suspicion, scanning from Mark to Luke and lingering on the vintage Harley. His voice, loud and sharp, sliced through the stillness. "Off the bike. Hands where I can see them. License and registration?" Mark answered, struggling to keep his voice calm while anxiety surged inside. "My name is Mark Calloway. My documents are in my left jacket pocket. May I reach for them?" Slowly. Brennan didn't answer, just gave a curt nod, his hands hovering near his holster. Dawson, the younger officer, stood behind, quietly observing, caught between duty and an unfamiliar feeling. Worry for this elderly man and his big shepherd. So silent, so fiercely loyal. As Mark reached for his jacket pocket, Luke moved with him, his breaths growing heavier. The dog stepped forward, body steady as a wall, placing himself between Mark and the officer. Luke's eyes flashed in the young sunlight, a wordless warning, an intensity found only in dogs who had lived too long with the scent of gunpowder, the darkness of battlefields, and the fear of losing loved ones. Brennan frowned, taking a step back, as if offended by Luke's very silence and stance. He shouted, voice brittle and harsh, "Get back! Move away now!" Luke didn't budge. His tail lowered, body taut as a bowstring, eyes locked on Brennan. In that moment, everything was suspended. Mark hurriedly spread his arms, desperate. "Luke, sit! Listen, Luke!" But this time, Luke did not obey. All his instincts, the instincts of a soldier, a friend who'd saved Mark from countless unseen dangers, converged in this single act of protection. If Mark was the father, Luke was the last shield. Brennan swept up in fear and prejudice and the panic of the moment, drew his gun. A heartbeat of hesitation, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Shoot!" The shout tore through the air, almost hopeless. The gunshot rang out, dry, merciless. The bullet tore through everything Mark had believed about safety, about decency on American soil. It struck Luke's body, ripping through his thick fur, severing the loyal lifeline in a single shot. A strangled bark caught in Luke's throat. His massive body wavered and collapsed at Mark's feet, leaving a bright red smear on the cold asphalt. Mark's world shattered. He dropped to his knees, arms thrown around Luke's head. Blood soaked his hands, hot and hopeless. Mark screamed, a howl that tore through the quiet morning. "No, Luke, don't leave me!" But nothing stopped. Brennan rushed forward, forcing Mark to the ground, his aged wrists clamped in cold steel cuffs. Mark's cheek pressed to the gritty road, right beside the growing pool of Luke's blood, mixed with gasoline, with morning dew, and the scent of loss he remembered from the days comrades had fallen beside him. Dawson stood frozen, unable to move. All he could hear was his own ragged breathing. All he could see was Mark being dragged across the asphalt. Luke, the shepherd who had first inspired Dawson's awe, lay motionless, his brown eyes open, glazed with tears, but the light already gone. In his final moments, Mark felt Luke's paw twitch weakly, the dog's head reaching for him. One last desperate effort to be closer, to say goodbye. "I did my best. I'm sorry." Time slowed to a crawl, images flashing by like an old war film. Comrades falling, ambulance sirens, shouts through smoke and fire, and now another loyal friend gone forever, not to war, but to fear and invisible prejudice. Mark was handcuffed, face pressed to the freezing ground, but in his mind there was only Luke, the most loyal soldier he'd ever known, who'd spent a lifetime protecting him, asking nothing in return. No barking, no blame, no tears. Only a silent departure, like an unsung hero. Dawson looked down, his hands trembling on the holstered gun, lips murmuring an apology far too small for the loss that had just unfolded before him. And so, on a quiet stretch of Silver Creek Road, the peaceful morning shattered with a single wordless shot. All that remained were two beings, a man pinned to the earth, a dog lying in his own blood, and the kind of bond only those who have lost their dearest friend can ever truly understand. In the moment after the gunshot, the world around Mark slowed to the point of suffocation. His breath came in short, jagged bursts. The blood in his chest felt frozen. Before his eyes, Luke collapsed onto the pavement. The great body of the dog suddenly fragile, utterly vulnerable. Yet in Luke's eyes, there was no resentment, only worry for his owner. Those eyes bore into Mark, asking, "Are you okay?" "I'm still here." Mark forgot everything else. The cold handcuffs biting his wrists, the gray chill of the road, the chaos of shouting voices overhead, all became distant noise. He tried to crawl toward Luke, but Brennan shoved him down, brutally restraining every desperate effort. Dirt and gravel smeared Mark's cheek and hair, but he didn't care. His whole being focused on Luke's ragged breaths, growing fainter with every second. Even wounded, Luke would not give up. A low, hoarse whimper sounded in his throat as he pushed up with his front legs, trying to drag his bloodied body toward Mark. Each movement brought him only a few inches closer, but each left behind a streak of deep red across the cold asphalt, as if his very heart was bleeding out onto the street, spending the last of its life just to reach his master. That sight, a large shepherd dragging himself in pain, blood mixing with road dust, eyes burning with love for the man he adored, left everyone nearby stunned. Passers-by began to stop. Some covered their mouths in horror, some turned away unable to look, but others silently raised their phones, filming, sensing that this was no longer a routine traffic stop. From the crowd, a young woman, her curly red hair ablaze, her eyes fierce with anger and grief, cried out, "He was only protecting him. I saw it all. That dog never attacked anyone." Her voice rang out, cutting through the heavy air of that little street. Her words became an unspoken indictment aimed at the two officers, especially Brennan, who had coldly pulled the trigger. Brennan spun around, his face tightening. "This is a crime scene. Back up. Don't interfere." But his words had lost their weight in the face of the community's anger. Others started to speak out, whispering to each other before raising their voices. Did the police really just shoot a dog? That dog did nothing wrong. Every gaze, every phone pointed at the officers, and at the blood trailing from Luke, collectively accused, exposing a wrong that could not be explained away. The sounds of traffic and chatter faded, replaced by the most sorrowful noise of all, Luke's weak whimpering and Mark's tears spilling onto the blood-soaked road. Dawson, the young officer, bystander to this violence, couldn't hide his shock. His hands shook, fingers clawing at his holstered weapon. He stepped back, swallowing hard, his eyes fixed on every agonizing movement Luke made. This wasn't just a dog. For Mark, Luke was a best friend, a family member, a comrade. For Dawson, this moment, the silent sacrifice playing out before him, planted a seed of doubt about justice, about duty, about humanity itself. Mark could do nothing but whisper Luke's name, his voice fractured and trembling in rhythm with the dog's desperate crawl. "Luke, good boy. Hang on, buddy." He longed for freedom, to cradle his dog the way he always had after wounds on the battlefield. But his cuffed hands, a symbol of helplessness and injustice, could only clench in pain and regret. Still, Luke crawled on, pausing for breath and then inching closer. The blood streaked bright on the pavement, like a map of everything most loyal in a dog's heart, always moving toward his person, never turning away. A child passed by, clutching his mother's sleeve, and looked up to ask, "Mom, why is the dog crying?" The mother bent down, hugging her child, her eyes red and unable to answer. In the crowd, a middle-aged man bowed his head, murmuring a prayer for Luke and for the heartbroken man at his side. No one noticed Dawson quietly stooping to pick up Mark's fallen helmet, his hands shaking. He looked at Brennan, then at Luke, then at Mark, all the theory and procedure of police academy meaningless in the presence of a dog's loyalty. Just then, Luke stopped, his body trembling violently, breath coming in shallow gasps. He stretched his head, gently touching Mark's boot, as if, for one last time, he needed to feel that familiar warmth. Luke's eyes were still open, their gentle glow saying goodbye. "I tried my best. I'm sorry I couldn't stay longer." Mark broke down, sobs shaking him, tears spilling down to mix with Luke's blood on the street. Each tear fell into the spreading red, forming an unbreakable thread between a man and his loyal dog. The years of fighting together, surviving together, all condensed into this moment where a red trail linked two destinies, two souls. And then, in the dim morning light, every eye of police, passers-by, and those live-streaming the event was drawn to this scene, a loyal dog using his own blood to write the last song of love, protection, and sacrifice beyond anything human. No one could have known that after a gunshot, the heart of a shepherd dog could shatter just like a human's. In that moment, as the sun crested the horizon, Silver Creek Street fell silent, swallowed by grief, a scene only those who truly love animals could ever fully comprehend. Luke collapsed after the shot, his large body shuddering briefly before quietly accepting the pain. Without a single anguished howl, without an ounce of blame, all that remained was his will. The will forged through years spent at Mark's side, through countless rainy seasons, through every back alley of old battlefields. Mark understood every one of Luke's expressions: unwavering resilience, gentle loyalty. Handcuffed, Mark was pressed to the freezing pavement by Brennan, his cheek against the asphalt still holding traces of morning dew. The smell of Luke's blood filled his nose, a scent both agonizing and familiar, and somewhere in his heart, old memories surged back. All those times Luke had rested his head on Mark's thigh after long marches, the times he had licked Mark's wounds like a devoted medic, the quiet mornings he woke Mark with a gentle lick on a wrinkled hand. But now, what lay before him was not the peace of the past, but harsh reality. Though blood had darkened his gray fur, Luke would not surrender. He braced himself on his front legs, trying with all he had left to crawl toward Mark. Each movement left his belly fur soaked in bright red, painting a long trail on the street, a small map of sacrifice, drawn with his final drops of blood. Luke's eyes never left Mark, not for a second. In that instant, all the crowd's shouting and chaos was drowned beneath that gaze, the gaze of a being who could not speak, but said everything through his actions. It was the look of a soldier, ready to face danger just to protect his comrade. It was the look of a friend who would never abandon his loved one, not even in their last moment. Dawson stood in the distance, throat tight with emotion. He had read, had heard, hundreds of stories about dogs saving people, but only now, witnessing Luke, did he truly understand. An animal's loyalty and love could go far beyond the logic of humans. He wondered, if he were Luke, would he have the courage to crawl through his own blood just to reach his person one last time? Mark strained, despite the cuffs, trying to get closer to Luke. For a moment he forgot his age, forgot the pain of cold iron biting his wrists. All he wanted was to hold Luke one last time, just as he had after every life-or-death battle. "Luke, don't leave me, you hear?" His voice broke, trembling. Luke answered by lifting his head, exhaustion etched deep in his face. His eyes still burned with that last spark, the same fire Mark had seen in foxholes long ago, when just one look was enough for the two of them to understand each other without a word. Luke panted, raised his paw once more, each move tearing his wound wider, blood flowing faster. But he never cried out, never begged to stop. On the sidewalk, the bystanders were silent, none able to hold back tears. A young woman wept openly, hands shaking as she filmed. A little boy peeked out from behind his mother, eyes wide at a tragedy he'd never seen before. No one dared approach, afraid to startle Luke, only able to witness his final journey, a living epic of courage and unconditional love. Luke's breath grew weaker and weaker. He managed to crawl close, blood already painting a long stretch between them, a red thread binding two lives. In his last fragile moment, Luke stopped, nudging his head against Mark's outstretched, cuffed hand. Those brown eyes met Mark's, not pleading, but reassuring, giving a message. If Luke could have spoken, he would have whispered, "I'm still here, Commander." The words never came, but Mark heard them echo in his heart. He lowered his face, tears mixing with Luke's blood on the street, whispering as if repeating an old promise from the battlefield. "Thank you, Luke. Your commander will never forget you." That scene, a man in cuffs, head bowed over his dying dog, surrounded by strangers, outrage, and injustice, became the silent anthem of voiceless souls. Luke's blood became the red thread linking days of freedom, forging a connection beyond time. Between man and dog, past and present, loneliness and kinship. And there, on Silver Creek's little road, Luke never gave up, because for him, love and loyalty were greater than any pain, greater even than death. Luke's blood still trailed across the road, and the unwavering gaze he kept on Mark haunted everyone who witnessed that scene. While the shock and pain of those gathered had yet to fade, one woman took action. Teresa Martinez, a Silver Creek elementary school teacher, gentle by nature, not one for trouble or confrontation, was moved beyond her usual reserve by the sight of the bleeding shepherd dragging himself toward his owner. Hands trembling with anger and compassion, Teresa pulled out her phone, not just to record, but to live stream, providing both evidence and sharing with the community what she knew was an injustice. At first her camera shook, but soon the frame steadied. Teresa moved closer, recording and whispering her explanation to the viewers. "Everyone, this is Main Street, Silver Creek. The police just shot a big shepherd dog when he tried to protect his owner. The owner, an elderly veteran, is in handcuffs. And the dog, oh God, he's still crawling to him. Even though he's bleeding so much, I've never seen anything this heartbreaking." Within minutes, the live stream viewership skyrocketed. Comments flooded the screen. "What's happening? Why did the police shoot a dog? A veteran? He didn't do anything wrong. The dog was just protecting his owner." People far from Silver Creek, Teresa's friends, parents of her students, even total strangers, were captivated by the scene unfolding on their small screens. Some began tagging animal rights organizations, local media, and lawyers. The wave of outrage, sympathy, and the need for truth spread rapidly, swelling across social networks. But the most striking moment came from an unexpected comment amid the torrent of messages. "I'm a veterinarian, used to work at a military animal checkpoint up north. The shepherd in the video is a trained dog. I recognize the faint scar on his left leg. These dogs never attack without cause. They only act when their owner is in danger. He's not an ordinary dog." Immediately, pet group members, veterans associations, and the local press all seized on this detail. Curiosity and emotion grew into admiration and anger, not only because the police had shot a dog, but because they had shot a creature that had served, that had protected comrades, and stood by a person through years of loneliness. Across town, in her small house, Mark's daughter Harper saw the video going viral. She clutched her phone, overcome with fear, rage, and pain, unable to speak. Whispering to a colleague at her military unit, she said, "Luke's been shot. He was Dad's old canine. He saved Dad from 2 ambushes. If this video spreads more, the truth will come out." Clip after clip, frame after frame of Luke crawling toward Mark, his eyes bright even as blood streamed down his back, his tongue trying to lick his owner's wounds, while Mark's handcuffed arms couldn't even pet his loyal dog, became an online symbol. Hashtags like Justice for Luke, Respect Veterans, and Save K9 Dog trended across forums. Teresa's words were shared everywhere. Luke isn't just a dog. He's a comrade, a real soldier, a silent protector. The police went too far. They didn't see this was a trained dog, a dog who served in the U.S. military. Mark, that old veteran, deserves better, and so does Luke. On the scene, the viral outcry quickly put pressure on Silver Creek authorities. A local newspaper reporter arrived to meet Teresa and request the original footage and her statement. An animal protection volunteer group contacted the nearest veterinary station, asking them to rush to check on Luke, even though his survival was still uncertain. In the pale sunlight, Luke's blood still flowed, but now every drop had become a silent cry for help, echoing far and wide. Teresa didn't stop live streaming. She moved her phone closer to Luke, her voice trembling. "Everyone, please pray for Luke. He's never left his owner, and we won't leave him either." The sound of the dog's ragged breathing, Mark's broken sobs, and Teresa's own tears blended into a heartbreaking chorus in the middle of Main Street. The crowd, though still unable to intervene, shared the same gaze, furious, sorrowful, moved, and torn. The power of loyalty and love between human and dog, between Mark and Luke, had become an unstoppable wave, strong enough to shake even the hardest hearts. From this moment, the story of Luke, the dog who was more than a four-legged animal, a nameless soldier, truly touched the community's heart, becoming both an inspiration and a warning to anyone who ever doubted the value of loyalty and friendship that crosses all boundaries. The last image Teresa streamed was still of Luke curled beside his own blood, breathing faintly, with Mark handcuffed and kneeling at his side. In a sunlit room at a military base dozens of miles away, Captain Harper Calloway, Mark's only daughter, sat frozen before her phone. She couldn't look away from the shaking live stream, where the father she revered most and his four-legged friend, Luke, lay on the threshold between life and death. At first, Harper thought it was a mistake, some cruel prank, or just another sensationalized accident the news loved to exploit. But the longer she watched, the clearer it became. The salt and pepper beard, the familiar posture atop the old Harley, even the way Luke hastily licked Mark's wound as he lay beside him. That was Mark Calloway, her father, her friend, and the silent hero of her heart. With trembling hands, Harper video-called her unit, hoping someone would tell her she was mistaken. But her comrade, Lieutenant Rivera, fell silent as he watched the live stream link. "Oh God, Harper, is that your dad?" Harper swallowed back tears, nodding. "And Luke, too. You see? He's still by my dad's side, even after being shot." In that instant, the blood of generations of soldiers surged through Harper. She shook off her shock, her military training kicking in, her commander's mindset refusing to sit by while her family suffered injustice. In the military, Harper was known for her decisiveness, calm, and the courage to make the hardest choices in a crisis. Today, for the first time, she poured all that resolve into saving her own family. "Rivera, Level 1 alert. I need full personnel files and special clearance for an emergency convoy. This is a veteran in distress situation." Rivera had never seen Harper so steely. He knew within minutes the higher command would hear of it. But Harper didn't stop at the internal alarm. She sent a distress call through the Department of Defense's emergency system, including video of Luke being shot and Mark in handcuffs. On the small screen, Harper saw Luke lying on his side, gasping. She remembered years ago, as a third grader, when Luke, just a puppy her father had brought back from base, would curl at her feet, licking her teary eyes when she was sad. As she grew up, she watched Luke become Mark's teammate, bodyguard, and closest family. Once, after a storm, it was Luke who first found Mark when he was hurt, and pulled someone to help. Through every danger, Mark had never been alone, because Luke was always there. Harper herself had leaned on Luke through the early days of moving away from home, the dog's smart eyes and loving smile anchoring her childhood memories. He was more than an animal. He was a symbol of life, loyalty, and family. Today, seeing Luke crawl to her father and collapse beside that bloody trail, Harper understood. Without swift action, she could lose both pillars of her world in a single morning. Without hesitation, Harper used her special military access, Her captain's rank allowed her to trigger an emergency code for cases involving endangered veterans and trained K-9s. The system instantly escalated the alert to the nearest command base. An urgent warning flashed on the screen. Rapid response team, confirming location. Preparing to deploy. At the same time, Harper sent a special notice to veteran groups and K-9 associations with a video clip and message. Mark Calloway, veteran my father, illegally detained. Luke, a K-9 military service dog, is critical. Please help. Within minutes, replies poured in from veterans, animal rescue groups, lawyers, and reporters. Everyone shared the video and sent messages of support to Harper. We're with you. Veteran support convoy mobilizing. Luke is a hero. He can't be allowed to die in vain. The image of Luke barely breathing, beside a handcuffed Mark, spread thousands of times, each share tearing away another layer of society's apathy. The pain, the anger, and above all, the love for that dog became the force propelling Harper to act with everything she had. In that moment, Harper was no longer the little girl hiding behind her father. She was a captain, a woman standing between two worlds, the world of duty and reason, and the world of emotion and mercy. Today, both worlds united, forging a strength she'd never felt before. She gazed at her phone, eyes fierce. Dad, I won't let you and Luke be alone. Help is coming, soon. And as if by some miracle of kinship and honor, a wave of response surged, not just within the military community, but through every corner where people had ever loved an animal or known the pain of loss. In that instant, Harper knew she was not just saving her father and Luke. She was standing up for millions of voiceless beings around the world. And somewhere, across that Silver Creek road, Luke seemed to be waiting for a miracle, a convoy, a real family that would never leave him behind. From the command room at the military base, the urgency rippled out like an underground wave. The special military alert, with images of Mark in handcuffs and Luke lying, barely breathing, beside a trail of blood, reached General Anthony Hayes's desk less than 10 minutes after Harper hit the emergency send button. General Hayes had commanded the toughest campaigns, had weathered losses beyond count, but rarely had he seen a dog's gaze in a video reach so deep into his own heart. Silently, he paused the video and zoomed in on Luke's face. The dog's eyes were wide, struggling to stay conscious, glowing not with fear but with absolute loyalty and trust in his master. Beside him, Mark, an old comrade, once a symbol of unbreakable spirit, now lay helpless, hands cuffed, unable to reach out and protect his only friend. General Hayes nodded firmly. He needed no further questions, no procedural fuss. Anyone who had ever been a soldier knew the one rule in every battle. No one gets left behind, not even a dog. He called Harper in, his voice steady but commanding. Captain Calloway, you have full authority. You lead the response team. The mission. Secure Mark Calloway and the dog Luke. Rapid response team is ready in 10 minutes. I want no one left behind, not even animals. Harper stood tall and saluted, her face set with unshakable resolve. Yes, sir, I promise. I'll bring both my father and Luke home safe. The alarm rang through the base, as if summoning a company to war. Soldiers rushed to the motor pool, each team moving in perfect sync. No one asking why. They'd all seen the video, seen Luke, heard the dog's faint cries. Many quietly adjusted their K-9 pins, their eyes full of somber determination. In every heart, memories flickered, of dogs that had once saved them from the hell of combat, of comrades who never left one another behind. 20 Humvees rolled out of the garage, engines roaring across the base. Military flags, K-9 memorial ribbons, and the American flag all flew high from the lead vehicle. The convoy quickly fell into formation, ready to roll. They knew this was no ordinary mission. It was a mission of compassion, of justice, and of the deep loyalty that binds people and dogs, soldiers and friends. Inside the command Humvee, Harper sat up front, gripping the radio, eyes locked ahead. In the cabin, medics checked emergency gear, preparing for any crisis, not just for a man, but for a dog as well. An army doctor asked quickly, "Do you know what Luke eats? Any drug allergies?" Harper answered, voice tight with worry. "Luke isn't picky, just allergic to penicillin. He's a pure working dog, has been through life and death with my father." The story of Luke and Mark flashed like lightning through internal comms. Many in the convoy had heard about Luke, the shepherd in Mark's old photos, the dog who had once saved the whole unit from an ambush at the border. Stories like these never grew old for soldiers, because every life, even on 4 legs, is still a comrade. "Remember, no one gets left behind, not even a dog," Harper repeated like an oath. Every head in the Humvee nodded. Nothing more needed saying. The convoy turned onto the highway, engines roaring into the morning sun. A symphony of determination. On forums, the online community tracked the convoy's route, prayed for Mark and Luke, and sent thanks to the soldiers on this rescue mission. Retired vets from nearby towns gathered, ready to lend support, a living reminder that honor, loyalty, and friendship never fade from a soldier's blood. On the roadside, people began tying white ribbons, posting photos of Luke and Mark with the words, "You are not alone." Along the route to Silver Creek, every eye watched, every wave and flashlight beam lighting the way. Each gesture a sign of hope. A dog like Luke, a father like Mark, deserved to come home, not just to family, but to the warm embrace of the entire community. And up ahead, where Luke's blood still stained the road, it seemed as if he was still waiting, not taking his eyes off the familiar figure, never letting go of hope, not for a single instant of his life as a friend, a soldier, and family. As the sound of the Humvee convoy reached Silver Creek, the atmosphere at the scene became heavier than ever. The crowd fell silent. Only the rumble of engines and the pounding hearts of witnesses broke the stillness of that painful moment. As soldiers quickly set up a perimeter and medics rushed to Mark and Luke, Harper, Captain and Mark's daughter, walked straight toward Officer Jason Brennan, who was still stunned and bewildered by the arrival of the military. Harper stopped just a short distance from Brennan. Her face could not hide her pain, but her eyes were cold and resolute, as if she carried all the faith, love, and anger of the hundreds of thousands watching online. She gripped her radio tightly, but her voice was chillingly calm. "You just shot a hero," Harper said, locking eyes with Brennan. Her words rang through the crowd like a warning bell. "That dog, Luke, wasn't an ordinary animal. He was my father's comrade, the friend of an entire unit, a true soldier." Brennan lost his composure for a moment. He glanced around, seeing the arrival of soldiers, the cold stares of fellow officers, and the haunted eyes of the townspeople. Still, his instincts urged him to defend himself, his voice shaking as he tried to sound firm. "He attacked me first. I was following protocol to protect myself," Brennan said loudly, as if trying to justify himself to everyone present. But at the edge of the scene, Police Chief Daniel Jameson, who had rushed there after the emergency alert, had no patience left for baseless excuses. Sternly, he ordered his officers, "Check every security camera in the area. Pull the live stream videos too. I want the truth, now." A young officer quickly replayed Teresa Martinez's video and footage from the roadside cameras. Dozens of eyes were glued to the small screen, where the images played back in slow motion. Mark standing still, hands raised, no threatening moves. Luke only stood close by, not growling, not attacking, just staring at Brennan, ready to protect but showing no aggression. As Brennan raised his gun, Luke stepped forward, eyes fixed on Mark. The shot rang out, Luke fell, and then struggled to crawl to his owner, a trail of red blood silently accusing. That image thickened the air around them. Everyone held their breath, looked at one another, then turned toward Brennan. No words could justify what had happened. The truth was too clear. There was no attack from Luke. It was all a lie, a blatant lie hidden behind power and prejudice. Chief Jameson didn't hesitate, his voice ringing out, sharp and unwavering. "Brennan, you are suspended immediately. Hand over your weapon and badge. We will investigate this entire incident, including abuse of power and falsification of reports." Brennan's face turned pale. He tried to protest, but his words vanished among hundreds of eyes, among Mark's hollow gaze and Luke's dying, yet hopeful, look. Somewhere, a child sobbed. A woman clutched her child's hand, and Harper, still standing, never took her eyes off Brennan until he was finally led away from the scene. The circle of people quickly parted from military medics and animal rescue teams to reach Luke. A veterinarian checked the dog's pulse and breathing, quietly shaking his head at the severity of the wounds. "We need to get him to the hospital now. Whether he survives will depend on his will to live," the vet said softly, his eyes weighed down with concern. Mark, shaken in both body and soul, begged to have his handcuffs removed, then crawled trembling to Luke. Tears streamed down his aged face, falling onto his friend's blood-matted fur. Harper knelt beside her father, clutching Mark's hand and gently stroking Luke with the other, whispering, "Dad, Luke's not leaving us. He's a warrior." In that moment, everyone around them felt the strength of their bond, a friendship beyond the boundary of human and animal, beyond pain and injustice. The sight of Luke, wounded, still trying to wag his tail, looking up at Mark as if to comfort him, made even the online audience watching every second of the live stream burst into tears. In the distance, journalists had begun recording the story, ready to send it to every corner of the nation. And deep in every heart, one undeniable truth emerged. Luke's loyalty and friendship, and Harper's courage in facing the truth, had become a flame-lighting hope for justice and humanity in the real world. Brennan's suspension at the scene was just the first wave in a coming storm, a shift toward justice rising painfully from tragedy. And at the center of it all, Luke, with his blood, his bravery, and his unbroken gaze, had unwittingly become a symbol of truth, courage, and the strength of never giving up. The atmosphere in the military infirmary always carried its own sense of urgency, but today it was shrouded in a heavy, silent mist. Harper sat beside the bed, gently holding her father's thin hand, eyes fixed on the emergency room where the veterinarians and medics were fighting to save Luke. The dog both father and daughter loved like family. The steady beeping of machines, hurried footsteps, and the harsh light of surgery lamps through frosted glass created an air that hovered between hope and helplessness. Mark was silent for a long time, his weary eyes staring into space, as if all his fatigue and pain had gathered into a shadow pressing on his shoulders. Harper squeezed his hand tighter and asked softly, "Are you okay, Dad?" Mark didn't answer right away. He leaned back, sighed. Then his gaze took on a flicker of confusion that only comes when old memories return. Unstoppable. "You know, Harper, this isn't the first time I've been pushed into the darkness of injustice," he said, his voice deep, slow, each word sinking into the heart of the listener. 5 years ago, not long after I retired, one evening I was walking down a quiet alley near home. It was dusk, and I just wanted some fresh air, to clear my head after years wrestling with old memories. Harper listened, leaning in, as if sensing a secret he had always kept to himself. 2 strangers appeared. I recognized the look in their eyes right away. The same look I'd seen so many times in war, only colder here at home. One of them said, "Old man, this isn't a place for people like you." Mark paused, sighing, his hands trembling slightly. "They jumped me, beat me hard. If I were younger, maybe I could have fought back, but I'd run out of strength long ago. I went down, thinking nobody would ever know I'd fallen on that dark street." Harper squeezed his hand tightly, silent tears running down her face. Even as an officer, used to battlefields, she could never get used to the pain of seeing someone she loved hurt. But then Luke showed up. Mark smiled gently, his eyes brightening as if drawing strength from the memory. He didn't growl, didn't act crazy, just rushed between them, barking, baring his teeth, looking like he was saying, "If you touch him, you'll have to get through me first." I remember those two backing off, cursing and running when they saw Luke wouldn't back down. He didn't save me with his fangs or strength, but with the presence of a warrior who's seen battle, with a love that needs no explanation. Mark squeezed Harper's hand, looking deep into her eyes. If Luke hadn't been there, I wouldn't be here telling you this, Harper. There'd be no one to walk these final years with you. Harper wiped her tears, moved and aching at once. She knew that in her father's heart, Luke wasn't just an animal, but a living memory of survival, a symbol of faith in goodness even when life was at its harshest. The surgery light still glowed from behind the glass. Harper glanced over, trying to picture Luke fighting for his life. She remembered how many times Luke had been there for her, how he'd saved her father from nightmares, how he'd sat guard at the door while they slept after long, exhausting days. Luke was the sacred link between past and present, between brutal battlefields and their peaceful home. Silence stretched on, broken only by the machines and the occasional faint moan from the emergency room. Mark closed his eyes, lost in memories. Days when Luke walked quietly by his side, never needing to speak, always knowing when Mark needed help most. Harper placed a hand gently on her father's shoulder, whispering, "Dad, this time I'll do everything to bring Luke home too. He's saved our family more times than we can count." Mark nodded, letting the tears fall, neither of them hiding it, because they both knew. Sometimes the greatest strength isn't in a roar, but in the quiet resilience of a loyal dog, a voiceless friend who'd performed miracles in the shadows of injustice. And in that moment, father and daughter promised themselves the past would never repeat, that no one, man or dog, would ever face the darkness alone again. The atmosphere in the military hospital's intensive care ward was always cold and tense, but tonight it was weighed down by an even heavier silence. Outside, Harper still sat quietly beside her father. The neon lights softened, casting gentle shadows across Mark's worn, tired face, where, beyond the pain and anxiety, there flickered a fragile hope. The night seemed to stretch on endlessly. Sometimes, all that could be heard was the ticking of a clock, a nurse's footsteps, or the soft hum of the automatic doors. After a surgery that lasted more than 3 hours, the emergency room doors finally swung open. The military veterinarian who had operated on Luke stepped out. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep, but glimmered with hope. "Mr. Mark, Luke made it through. He's still weak, but his heart is strong, just like his owner," she said, offering a reassuring smile. Harper let out a sigh of relief, while Mark, finally, let his tears flow freely. Father and daughter quietly entered the recovery room. On a low, padded bed, Luke lay on his side, wrapped in white bandages, a clean cloth covering one eye. Only one deep brown eye was open, weary but unyielding. Under the dim light, his gray-gold fur still matted with blood, Luke's breathing gradually steadied, more even with each minute. Mark knelt beside him, barely daring to touch the tangled fur. He leaned in close, whispering softly, as if afraid to disturb the fragile miracle. "Wake up, old soldier. It's time to open your eyes, Luke. I'm here." At first, Luke only stirred a little, his eyelid twitching as if he were still drifting somewhere between life and death. Then came a faint, raspy whimper, fragile as the last winter breeze. Suddenly, his tail, which had lain motionless, began to move, slowly at first, then with more strength, sending a ripple of hope across the bedding. Harper burst into tears. She knelt beside her father, placing her hand gently on Luke's head, and whispered through sobs, "Luke, you're home. We're all waiting for you. You did so well." Luke parted his mouth, trying to lift his head from the pillow before letting it rest again. In his one remaining eye, tears shimmered, clear as dawn, a miraculous connection between human and dog, between pain and a bond that could never be broken. He turned his gaze toward Mark, trying to move closer despite the pain in his wounds. Mark leaned down, his cheek against Luke's nose. He pressed trembling lips to fur still stained with blood. "My brave soldier, it's all right now. I'm here, and no one will hurt you again." Luke wagged his tail again, this time with more vigor. The feeling in the room was overwhelming. There was no need for loud cries or promises, only Mark's grateful eyes, Harper's gentle sobs, and the unbreakable will of a dog who had faced death more than once. The nurses and army doctors stood quietly at the door, holding their breath. They knew, in their profession, that miracles often came from sheer will to live, from invisible bonds between people and animals that words could never describe. But this time, everyone felt something even more sacred, as if Mark's soul had lent strength to Luke, and Luke, in turn, had given the whole family a new kind of courage. Mark sat by the bed, never looking away from Luke. He gently stroked his friend's head, repeating the familiar words of encouragement, just as he'd once done to young soldiers facing fear in battle. "Good job, Luke. No one could ever replace you. I'm so proud of you, my boy." In that moment, past and present merged. Memories of old battles, times when Luke had saved Mark from danger, and countless lonely nights where only the two of them kept each other company. All came alive in the loving gaze of all three. Luke lay quietly, his tail wagging now and then, as if to reassure Mark and Harper. "Don't worry, I'm not giving up yet. There's still so much our family has to do together." That night, in the recovery ward of the infirmary, a small miracle took place. Luke awoke, the voiceless warrior of the Calloway family, missing one eye, but with all his heart and loyalty undiminished. And everyone present, even those watching from afar, understood. It was Luke's survival, through sheer will and love, that inspired everyone with the fierce belief that as long as loyalty endures, there will always be a brighter tomorrow waiting ahead. Dawn was rising outside the hospital ward. Gentle sunlight streamed through the glass window, bathing the room in a bright yet soft golden hue. The space seemed to embrace the three, Mark, Harper, and Luke, in a rare peace after a long night of wavering between life and death. Luke still lay beside Mark, his large body wrapped in white bandages, but his remaining eye shone with a strange serenity. Harper made a cup of hot tea, set it beside her father, then sat by the window, where the first bird song sounded like a promise of new hope. Mark reached out and stroked Luke's head, his rough hand moving slowly across the soft, tangled fur that had borne so many wounds for him. Perhaps he'd sat like this on hundreds of other mornings, but never had he felt so deeply the weight of time and the friendship between human and animal. Harper broke the silence with a question that seemed light, but carried a hidden ache. "Dad, why is it that Luke never leaves your side?" Mark smiled slowly, but in his eyes was a deep sorrow. "My daughter in my life. Prejudice was never scarce. To many, I'm just an old black man with an old Harley. But to Luke, I'm his whole world." He paused, drawing a deep breath, as if gathering all his courage to open up. "The first time I was stopped by the police just for the color of my skin, I was still young, walking down a deserted street in the South. Back then, I knew no protection but my own bare hands. But from the day I had Luke with me, everything began to change." Harper stayed silent, eyes brimming with tears as she listened. "There were times I met hateful looks, cruel words, even a fist thrown in a dark alley. But Luke, he never let me take that pain alone. Whenever anyone meant harm, he'd always stand between us. Once in the park, 2 drunk men came over, shouting. Luke barked, his fur bristling, eyes fixed on them, as if to say, 'If you want to get to him, you'll have to go through me.' And every time, they left." He looked at Luke with deep affection, remembering all the cold winters when this dog had been his living heater. All the lonely nights Luke sat close, quietly listening to every unspoken thought. The times he'd been ill, and Luke would lay his head on Mark's leg, giving him a strange new strength. Mark continued, his voice breaking. "But today, for the first time, Luke couldn't protect me completely. Not because he was weak, but because he wasn't given the chance. They were afraid of the pure love he had for me. When Brennan raised his gun, Luke still stood firm. He didn't run, didn't bite back, just looked at me as if asking, "What should I do?" And then he fell, trying to protect me. That's something I'll never forget as long as I live. Harper placed her hand on Luke's back, tears streaming down her cheeks, whispering, "If it were me, I would have collapsed long ago, Dad." Mark shook his head, smiling through his own tears. "No, Harper. It's thanks to Luke that you and I are strong. It's his resilience, through pain, through death, that gives us faith that kindness still exists in the world. Not everyone is cruel or numb. As long as there are creatures like Luke, this world will never be completely dark." In that small room, bathed in new morning light, a friendship had quietly grown between man and dog. No promises, no need for repayment, only loyalty and a love ready for sacrifice. Mark knew, after all the trials, Luke still always chose to stand with him, a peaceful anchor for his twilight years. Harper pressed her cheek to Luke's soft fur and whispered, "Thank you, Luke. Thank you for loving and protecting us right to the end." Outside, the sun rose bright, sweeping away the shadows of the old day. And in that moment, all three, Mark, Harper, and Luke, knew whatever storms lay ahead, they would face them together, because one voiceless heart would always shield their little family, even through the loneliest years. After a long night surviving the worst, it seemed as if peace had finally returned to the recovery ward of the military hospital. Harper dozed lightly on a chair beside the bed, while Mark fought to contain his anxiety, caring tenderly for Luke. The dog's wounds were still fresh, but what was stranger was the way Luke's eyes had turned sharp and cold, fixed constantly on the door. That morning, the warmth in the room was tinged with an odd sense of suffocation. Mark set a bowl of thin porridge in front of Luke, but the shepherd shook his head, backing away, refusing to eat. This genuinely worried Mark, because for Luke, sharing a meal with his owner after hardship had always been the greatest reward. But today, an uneasy restlessness simmered inside the shepherd, something neither Mark nor Harper could explain. Suddenly, Luke stood up, legs still trembling, bandages stained with blood. He slowly walked to the door, staring intently through the glass, as if waiting for someone, or sensing something beyond human understanding. Then, without warning, he scratched furiously at the door, barking non-stop, loud enough to draw not just Mark and Harper's attention, but also the nurses and doctors nearby. Mark approached, gently kneeling, his eyes filled with both kindness and concern. "Luke, easy now, what's wrong, boy?" But Luke would not stop. His eyes widened, ears standing straight, body stretched taut like a drawn bow. Each time Mark got closer, Luke scratched harder, barking, his gaze fixed on the old barracks outside the window, where the thick forest stretched like a green curtain behind the hospital. It was as if the dog was urgently trying to send a message, something that crossed the line between instinct and reason. Harper, woken by the noise, looked at her father in alarm. "Dad, is he in too much pain?" Mark shook his head, studying Luke's reaction closely. Years spent with four-legged companions had taught him this was not simply the cry of pain. He stroked Luke's back and whispered, "No, sweetheart." Luke's signaling something, not hurting. Harper watched closely. She could sense the unease in her father's eyes, but also trusted his intuition. Before, whenever Luke acted strangely, growling in his sleep, or suddenly standing guard at the door in the middle of the night, soon enough, something out of the ordinary would happen. That was the instinct of a trained dog who had survived countless dangers, a sense beyond human explanation. A passing vet, hearing Luke barking at the barracks, stopped to ask, "Is he hurt somewhere, Mr. Mark? Or reacting badly to medication?" Mark shook his head, eyes thoughtful. "I've lived with Luke for 10 years. If he was in pain, he'd just whimper quietly. Today, he's looking out at the barracks as if warning us about something bigger. Maybe there's a stranger or something dangerous nearby." Harper shivered, memories of Luke saving their family coming back. She grabbed her father's hand and said softly, We should alert the military police and security to check the base. Maybe Luke senses something we don't. Mark nodded. He trusted Luke's intuition absolutely. The very instinct that had saved him from trouble and danger so many times before. But this time, the warning in Luke felt even stronger than ever. The anxiety in the dog's eyes was not that of a creature in pain, but of a soldier on the battlefield, aware of a looming threat that comrades hadn't yet seen. I know. Luke was trained as a K-9, Harper said, her hand gently tracing the old scar along Luke's back. But Dad, you never really told me what he actually went through. Mark stared out the window of the army clinic, sunlight slanting through the trees and casting light across the bandage covering Luke's eye. His voice dropped, as if he were talking to time itself. He wasn't just a military dog, Harper. He was a strategic recon soldier. Back then, during an operation in Kandahar, my unit got trapped by a terrorist group in a valley filled with mines. The magnetic sensors were useless. There was too much interference. Luke, he was the only one who could still pick up the scent of homemade explosives. He led our entire unit step by step through that death maze until we finally made it out alive. He paused. His eyes seemed even deeper, lost somewhere far away. And then there was the night of the attack on Delta 7 base. When the insider planted a bomb under the comms room, the whole camp was in chaos. No one had any idea where the bomb was. Only Luke. He'd already caught shrapnel in his leg. He still growled, scratching at the hidden door behind the armory. We barely had 30 seconds to run before the whole back end of the camp blew sky high. Harper fell silent. Even as a soldier herself, she was shaken hearing it. You know something? Mark smiled softly, resting his hand on Luke's head. He never barked unless it mattered. But every time he did, it meant someone's life got saved. Luke shifted, as if he understood the story was about him. A quiet breath escaped. Not pride, just a sense of duty. I never saw him as just a pet, Mark said. He's a comrade. The only one I ever gave an order to, and trusted more than even myself. When the military police arrived to investigate, Luke barked even more fiercely, scratching at the door until his bandages slipped, fresh blood seeping out. Mark hurried to embrace his neck, soothing him. Calm down, son, I understand. I won't ignore your signal. But unease lingered in the eyes of both man and dog. And Mark knew, as long as Luke kept warning, something big was coming. Something that Luke's loyal heart and protective instinct simply could not ignore, even with his own wounds barely healed. There are days, even months, when every instinct leads to a harsh truth. Between humans and animals, there are bonds stronger than words. And Mark sensed, this time, Luke would again lead him to a deeper truth no one could have foreseen. Luke's relentless alarm weighed heavily on the hospital, filling the air with suspicion and worry. Mark understood. This dog would never give a false alarm, especially while still wounded and exhausted. After a quick meeting between Mark, Harper, the military police, and a few special forces officers, they decided to trust Luke's signal, for the shepherd's history and special missions commanded everyone's respect for his instincts. That morning, as the sun crested the hills west of Silver Creek, Luke's bandages were tightened, and he was carefully placed in a small utility vehicle behind the Special Operations team. Though weak, Luke's spirit burned with an unmistakable resolve. He barked in sharp bursts, ears pointed straight toward the old barracks, a place that once served as a training ground, supply depot, and held both Mark's proud and shadowy memories. Mark sat next to Luke, never taking his hand from the dog's neck, whispering encouragement. Go on, Luke. If you've chosen this, I'll go with you. Lead the way, soldier. Harper walked beside her father, her eyes a mix of worry and pride. The Special Forces team, seasoned soldiers all, were surprised to see a wounded dog so confident, so determined. They'd never seen a four-legged comrade push through pain just to finish a mission, especially when no one had given the command. The group, man and dog, followed a narrow path to the old warehouse district where secret equipment had once been stored. Wild grass covered the way, Earth sunken with age and moss stained the ground a forgotten green. But Luke pulled the leash insistently, sniffing every current of air, his eyes fixed on a dark patch behind the row of buildings. With each step, his paw prints pressed into the damp earth, heavy yet full of purpose, as if a mission bigger than himself was waiting up ahead. At the door of an abandoned warehouse, Luke suddenly stopped, letting out a deep growl from his throat. He jumped up, clawing hard at the long, unused door, then barked 3 sharp times, just as he'd been trained to do upon finding a critical target. A Special Forces officer approached, carefully unlocked and pushed open the rusted door. Light poured in, revealing a scene thick with dust. The wide room was piled with wooden crates, old safes, and rotting files. But Luke did not stop. He moved slowly, nose to the ground, then headed for a corner in the east wall, where an old safe still bore the faded marks of the military. Luke looked up and barked. The team immediately investigated, using specialized tools to break the lock on the safe. Harper and Mark stood close, hearts pounding. When the safe door swung open, the smell of old paper and rusted metal filled the air. Inside was a thick folder, tightly sealed in a moisture-proof bag and a security envelope. An officer carefully opened the stack of documents in front of everyone's astonished eyes. They were classified files related to a secret operation Mark had taken part in as a soldier. An operation thought to have disappeared into oblivion, leaving behind only scattered memories among the few surviving veterans. Harper skimmed through, stunned. "Dad, this is the full report of Operation White Fox in Eastern Europe. How did it end up here?" Mark fell silent, the memories flooding back. Those cold months, the nights spent with comrades in ambush, rescuing prisoners, fighting traitors from within their own ranks. He'd thought those secrets forever buried beneath the dust of history. Yet, thanks to Luke, they now stood revealed in the morning light. Luke didn't take his eyes off Mark, as if waiting for praise or comfort. But all Mark could do was kneel and embrace him. In his trembling arms, the loyal dog pressed his head to his master's chest, his breath warm and content as if he'd just completed the last mission of his life. The entire Special Forces team, once skeptical, now watched in awe, silent. Everyone realized it was Luke's instinct that had unlocked a part of history, bringing to light secrets tied to many lives, incidents never named in the press, now given a chance to be understood. Harper looked at Luke, squeezing her father's hand, tears in her eyes. Maybe this dog was the last one to keep faith alive for you, and your old unit. And as the group left the warehouse, Luke strode forward with pride, his wounds still unhealed, but his heart filled with a mysterious new strength. The strength of a dog who had been a witness, a friend, a silent hero in both the darkness and the light of life. The atmosphere in the emergency meeting room of the barracks grew heavy as the old files were spread across the table. The scent of decaying paper, smudged ink, and faded military seals evoked a dangerous Cold War era. Everyone was silent, except for Luke's rapid breathing. The shepherd, bandage still covering one eye, radiated alertness, his spine rigid with instinct. Harper was the first to break the silence. She quickly flipped through the pages, then paused at a document stamped, "Top Secret," her lips pressed tight. "Dad, look at this. This is the biochemical report from the oral camp case. Alongside the list of evidence and chemical samples, there's an evaluation report on Luke." Mark moved closer, his trembling hand brushing the line. "Shepard, Scent Identification Unit, Direct Commander, Sergeant Mark Calloway." A chill ran down his spine. All these years, memories of that mission had been like a buried nightmare, now suddenly rising to the surface. Luke, sensing the tension, moved over to Harper, resting his head on her lap and fixing his gaze on Mark, as if to remind them of his old vow. Always there, always protecting. A Special Forces officer pointed at the last line of the document. Only the shepherd named Luke was able to detect the scent of chemical X-13, thwarting an attempted biological weapons transfer in Eastern Europe. Scent detection ability, extremely rare, cannot be replicated with current technology. Mark read every line, memories flooding back of those days on the edge of death in the abandoned oral lab. It was Luke who had sniffed out traces of a colorless, odorless chemical, undetectable to humans but infamous in the world of counterintelligence. Because of that, they had broken up a bioweapons smuggling ring, saving an entire city from disaster. But the most frightening part wasn't even that. Harper, her voice tightening, read aloud a hastily handwritten note. Warning, Shepard subject, ID code L-02, has been targeted by external organizations as the only witness to successfully detect and sound the alarm. If subject is alive, must be given absolute protection, prevent capture by opposing factions. The air in the room thickened. It was clear now. Luke was not just an old friend dog. He was the final piece preventing the extremist group, thwarted by Mark and Luke years ago, from carrying out a new plot. If they returned, their first targets to eliminate would be Mark and Luke. Mark clenched his fists, guilt and duty swirling tightly in his chest. For years he had hidden all these secrets, hoping for a quiet life with his four-legged friend and his old Harley. But the return of old enemies meant all the dangers had come back. Not just for him, but for Luke, now a wounded, aging dog. Luke looked at his master quietly, then unexpectedly wagged his tail, as if utterly unafraid, as if to say, "We've come through the darkness once. What is there to fear?" Harper stood up, her eyes steely with resolve. "Dad, I'll tighten security. I'll alert the whole military to this threat. No one will get to you or Luke." Mark gave a strained smile, gently stroking Luke's head, his heart awash in a tide of pride, regret, and worry. "You know, Harper, of all my life's achievements, the greatest isn't any medal or victory. It's standing by Luke's side, right to the very end." Luke lifted his head, his single eye glowing with a supernatural resilience, indifferent to pain. And now everyone in the room knew. This was no longer just a battle of the past. It had returned, and the new circle of danger was only just beginning. Though it was midday at the barracks, the air felt colder after the emergency meeting. Outside, harsh sunlight scorched the fields of yellowing summer grass, but inside the command room, every person was weighed down by a single suspicion: the recent attack, the police shooting that seemed like a tragic accident, was only the opening move. Harper kept her eyes on the dossier just discovered in the old warehouse. She turned to a page from an old typewriter, with lines underlined in red ink, and a scrawl of English mixed with military codes. At the top of the page, one command stood out, cold and blunt. If Shepard ID 76245, Luke, is still alive, must be eliminated. Harper glanced at Luke. The dog was lying at Mark's feet, occasionally lifting his head, his one good eye wary as he stared out the window, as if the dangers of the past were gathering just outside. His wounds were unhealed, one eye still bandaged, but his spirit was undaunted, not afraid at all. In fact, Luke might have been the only one in the room fully aware that this hunt was far from over. Mark gripped Luke's shoulders, a surge of regret washing over him. He should have known long ago. The dangers of the past would never let an old soldier go, and would certainly never spare the loyal companion who'd shared in so many victories. Harper lowered her voice, carefully translating for the Special Forces officers. "This document confirms, not just Dad, but Luke is the target. He's the only living witness to identify Chemical X-13, their biggest vulnerability. If Luke is alive, the entire secret network could be exposed at any moment." A lieutenant colonel nearby flipped back to the file on that morning's shooting, summarizing with a dark expression. "Brennan? He's just a tool, not the mastermind. He's not clever enough to hide evidence this well. Someone's pulling the strings from the shadows, giving the orders, choosing Luke as the target." Harper nodded, her gaze hard. Brennan grew up in Silver Creek, with a long record of trouble. But today's attack wasn't just personal hatred or racism. It's part of something bigger, more sophisticated. We need to unmask this entire network, From the ringleader to the smallest pawn. Mark fell into thought, heavy with memories. He recalled those days in Eastern Europe, being hunted, he and Luke nearly dying in an exploding lab, escaping only because of Luke's unique skills that destroyed the enemy's plan. Back then, he believed that survival meant danger would stay in the past, but the past, like a ghost, always waited for its chance to return. Luke shifted, inching closer to the door, letting out a low bark, his ears perked up. Mark placed his hand on the dog's head, whispering, "Don't worry, Luke. Even if darkness comes, we'll face it together." A female Special Forces officer, an expert analyst, spoke up. There are two groups operating underground in the southern part of the state. One is high-tech organized crime, the other a branch of the international group involved in the White Fox case. Both have motives, and the means to manipulate local police. Harper turned to her father. "Dad, we need to move you and Luke to a maximum security location right away. The mastermind is still out there, and they won't give up." Mark managed a faint smile, trying to hide his fatigue. He looked at Harper, then at Luke, as if silently thanking them for never letting him fight alone, even though this battle might be harder than all the years of war behind him. Luke wagged his tail gently, his eyes fixed on the door, ready for his master's command, like an old soldier who had never backed down from any threat. Outside, sunset cast a golden light over the barracks. But somewhere in the darkness, the footsteps of predators crept closer. And inside, the old soldier and his shepherd clung to their faith. The hunt was not over, and they, the indomitable friends, would not fall, no matter what force waited behind the night. As night fell on the barracks, outside, the world was ablaze with a wave of emotion unlike anything seen before. In Silver Creek's cafes, on every smartphone in the hands of ordinary people, in big cities and even remote suburbs, two hashtags erupted and swept the nation like a wildfire: Justice for Luke and Stand with Mark. From early morning, Teresa Martinez's live stream, the teacher who had captured the confrontation between Mark, Luke, and the police, had gone viral. First, it was shared among veterans, those who had fought alongside Mark. Then among animal lovers, service dog advocacy groups, anti-racism communities, separate circles suddenly united by a tidal wave of outrage and deep empathy. On Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram, images of Luke collapsed on the street, his eyes filled with pain but fixed on his owner, a trail of blood behind him. And beside him, Mark in handcuffs, his silver hair dusty and disheveled, spread everywhere. On major forums, long posts and heartfelt confessions appeared one after another. Some wrote about canine dogs who had saved comrades on the battlefield. Others wrote, "Luke isn't just an animal. He's a comrade, a hero, a soul capable of loving." There were short poems, watercolor sketches captioned, "Don't let his loyalty be betrayed." International animal rights organizations quickly mobilized. A fundraising campaign for Luke's surgery and recovery was set up in hours and raised tens of thousands of dollars, accompanied by thousands of messages wishing love and hope for the old dog. A volunteer veterinary panel offered their services unconditionally, sending moving messages. "As long as Luke is breathing, we won't give up." Major media outlets joined in. NBC, CBS, ABC all aired special reports. The old black veteran and his shepherd, shot in broad daylight in Silver Creek. Images of a frail Luke, one eye bandaged but still wagging his tail at the sound of Mark's voice, silenced America. No one saw it as just a minor local conflict anymore, but as a story of loyalty, courage, and injustices echoing through generations. Everywhere, veterans groups reacted with outrage, writing open letters to the governor and Congress demanding a full investigation. Old friends of Mark, from battlefields in Europe, from the K-9 Corps, sent telegrams of support. "You are not alone. We stand with you and Luke." On television, experts discussed shepherds and K-9 dogs, recounting the feats of dogs like Luke, rescuing people from rubble, detecting toxins, saving their owners from death's door. One segment showed soldiers bowing their heads in farewell to war dogs, real tears from people who had seen death countless times, but couldn't remain unmoved by the sacrifice of a friend without words. International journalists joined in. CNN ran "When Loyalty Bleeds," the story of Mark and Luke. BBC, Al Jazeera, and even European news outlets analyzed justice for Luke as a cry for justice that crossed America's borders. Inside the Silver Creek Police Department, community pressure forced an emergency meeting, with announcements of suspensions for those involved and promises of transparency. A rare occurrence in the small town's history. At the barracks, Mark was stunned to see thousands of messages and hundreds of missed calls on his phone. He had never imagined that, only a day after tragedy, Luke would become the symbol of a new movement. Harper sat beside him, reading out messages, some from children sending drawings of Luke with Mark, with notes like, "Get well soon, hero dog." Luke seemed to feel the power of this love too. Though still in pain, he wagged his tail whenever someone entered the room, his eyes lighting up at the sound of Mark's voice. A military vet quietly told a reporter, "This dog may survive, not just because of medicine, but because of the love of millions who are praying for him." And like an invisible tide, the community's outrage and compassion, from millions who had never met Mark or Luke, became their shield, stronger than any convoy of Humvees, greater than any gun that could do them harm. Outside the barracks, night deepened, but in the glow of thousands of phone screens, countless virtual candles were lit for Luke, for Mark, for justice, and for the unshakable belief that loyalty, even silent, always finds a voice that carries farther than any other. As furious hashtags continued to blaze across America, behind the scenes of the media storm, a silent battle was quietly taking shape. In a small interrogation room, pale yellow light fell on the ashen face of Officer Eddie Dawson, the man who had stood silently by while Brennan fired at Luke that morning. His eyes were haunted, hands clenched on the edge of the table, sweat beading on his brow despite the steady hum of the air conditioning. Facing Dawson was Harper, military captain and Mark's daughter. For the first time, Harper was no longer the hardened commander from the battlefield, but a woman forced to hold herself together through pain and fury. "Officer Dawson," she began, her voice low but resolute. "We have evidence Brennan didn't act alone. Who gave the real order?" Dawson looked at Harper for a long moment. Regret and fear fought for control in his eyes. Finally, he exhaled, lips trembling, and began to speak, as if unloading a boulder that had pressed on his chest for days. I never wanted to be part of this, but—" Dawson stopped, hands tightening. "The Deputy State Police Chief, Alan Kramer, he's the one who ordered the removal of the old shepherd dog. Brennan was just a tool." The room went silent. Everyone present was stunned. Harper leaned forward. "His reasoning?" Dawson lowered his head, voice trailing off. "Kramer used to be a security advisor for a Middle East operation back in the 2000s. I heard Brennan say, back then, Kramer led a unit guarding a chemical weapons depot. There was an attempted assassination, and that Shepherd, Luke, scented out a specific trace, foiling a plot by a rebel group. Since then, Kramer's been threatened, always living in fear that Luke would one day recognize him, reveal old secrets that were never exposed." A chill ran down Harper's spine. So many old questions finally had answers. No wonder those classified files mentioned Luke as the only living witness. "He forced Brennan and me to keep silent. If we exposed anything, I'd lose my job, my career, maybe even my family's safety." Dawson looked up, eyes red-rimmed. "I never wanted Luke, or Mr. Mark, to be harmed. But I was too weak. After that day, I haven't been able to sleep. Seeing Luke lying there, I realized my silence was even crueler than that bullet." This information reached the Federal Investigation Unit that very night. The name Alan Kramer immediately became the center of the probe. Old files, grainy photos from Middle Eastern battlefields were pulled out. The man with graying hair, dressed in a crisp suit, turned out to be a ghost from the past, a man haunted by the fear that an old dog could expose every secret he had tried to bury. At the barracks infirmary, Mark heard it all, his heart breaking. He hugged Luke, whispering into his old friend's ear, "So it turns out we never escaped that old darkness, Luke. But this time, I won't let anyone tear us apart again." Luke turned, pressing his head gently into Mark's chest, eyes closing as if promising, no matter who stands behind it all, no matter how powerful or violent, Luke will never give up, will never let Mark face the past alone. That night, in the darkness of the barracks, Luke curled up beside Mark's bed. With one eye still bandaged, he lay utterly still, listening to every sound, as if he knew that out there, the ghosts of war long buried in the mud were stirring, trying to take everything away again. And in Mark's heart, once more, the fire of courage, a fire kindled by an old soldier and his voiceless friend, flared up, ready to face whatever secrets would soon be brought into the light of justice. The interrogation room drama hadn't yet faded, but by dawn, the entire base was thrown into the gears of a special operation. Throughout the night, dossiers were verified, silent orders relayed through encrypted channels. Federal special forces and military police stood ready, waiting for a signal. And that signal, unexpectedly, came from Luke. Just as the first pale light washed over the barracks' eastern tree line, Luke, still bandaged, wounded, missing an eye, suddenly sprang up, as if compelled by memories only he could sense. He refused breakfast, refused to rest, circling Mark and then, abruptly, scratching at the door, barking loud and clear. Ears pricked, nose pressed to the floor, Luke caught a scent far beyond human comprehension. Mark rushed over, embracing his old friend. "Is this it, partner? You want to lead the way?" Luke only answered with a low whimper, then turned and dashed toward the base gates. Harper, watching from a distance, instantly understood. The sign she'd waited days for had arrived. "Everyone, mount up." She gave the order, short and sharp. The Special Forces team, surprised only for a second, scrambled into Humvees, following Luke. The old dog now taking point like a battle-hardened commander. The road from the base to Silver Creek's outskirts wasn't long, but it had never felt this tense or this charged with hope. Up front, Mark held Luke tight, torn between pride and worry. Luke's gaze was laser-focused, tailing every turn. Each time they paused, he'd bark for confirmation before leading the way. For the team, it no longer mattered that he was battered or recently near death. What they saw was the undiminished will of a true warrior, refusing to give in. After nearly an hour, the convoy pulled up outside an old, secluded kennel, hidden deep in the woods. A place once infamous for canine training, but now long abandoned and shrouded in rumor. A rusty iron gate creaked open. Inside, rows of silent cages. The faint echo of distant barking and a sharp chemical odor hung heavy in the air. Luke barked, then shot toward a back room in the compound. The special ops team fanned out, sealing exits. Harper, Mark, and the squad commander followed Luke inside. Within, 4 men and 3 women were frantically gathering documents, shoving thick files into fire, rushing to destroy evidence. On the table, plastic bags filled with strange chemicals, the same substances used in old assassination missions. Most damning was a dossier stamped "Eliminate Witness," names printed in bold, Mark Calloway and Shepard 76245. Standing at the room's center, cold and stony-faced, was Alan Kramer, the deputy state police chief. His composure wavered when Luke advanced, growling low, recognizing the man who'd once haunted him from battlefields past. Harper shouted, "Nobody move! Hands up now!" Within minutes, the team had everyone subdued, evidence secured. Kramer struggled to maintain his arrogance, but when he locked eyes with Luke, scarred, one-eyed, still unbroken, his hand trembled. Mark stepped beside Luke, resting a hand on his head. "You did it, Luke. Once again, we found the truth because of your nose and loyalty." A special agent retrieved old photos. images of international crime scenes, proof linking Kramer's organization to a chain of witness assassinations. Each piece confirmed, without Luke, this truth would have remained buried forever. 7 were arrested on the spot. Alan Kramer, before a storm of cameras and federal agents, was handcuffed, face pale with fear. That evening, with Luke curled up beside Mark in the base infirmary, Harper came in, kneeling to stroke the battered dog. "Dad, maybe no one will ever truly grasp what Luke has given us. Without him, this darkness would never have been driven away." Mark smiled, his eyes shining. "Luke isn't just a dog, darling. He's a living symbol of loyalty, of truth, and of the small miracles we get to hold on to in this life." Outside the window, dawn was breaking. This time it carried real hope, that when a voiceless friend leads the way, the whole world can be illuminated by the light of truth and love. The anguished confession from Dawson in front of Harper and the investigation team was like a warning bell echoing in the hearts of everyone present that day. The truth about Alan Kramer, the one lurking behind a veil of power, using the police and people like Brennan as black hands to eliminate witnesses, including Luke, had put all values of ethics, loyalty, and justice through their greatest test. The next morning, when the mist had not yet lifted from the barracks yard, Mark was startled awake by fierce barking right next to his bed. Luke, now with only one bright eye, was using his whole body to scratch forcefully at the door, ears up, and that keen nose drawing in quick, short breaths. Clearly, this wasn't fear, but some invisible order, something old, rooted in instinct and memory. Mark hurriedly put on his coat and followed, half anxious, half trusting. "You've sniffed out something special again, haven't you, buddy?" At that moment, Harper received a message from the investigation team. Overnight tracking data showed a strange signal from the northern edge of Silver Creek, at the site of a long-abandoned breeding kennel. Luke took a deep breath and then, of his own accord, dashed toward the barracks gate. Harper looked at Mark, all doubt gone, only absolute trust remaining. "Let Luke lead the way, Dad. The Special Forces team is ready." Within minutes, a small convoy of Humvees and fully armed soldiers quietly set out, following the footsteps of the old shepherd, the voiceless guide, but a living compass for justice. The road from the barracks to the kennel seemed short, but with each of Luke's steps, time seemed to slow. Every time he stopped, Luke barked loudly, sniffed the ground, wagged his tail in a certain direction, then moved again. The whole convoy was tense, eyes locked on the battle-scarred shepherd, filled with admiration. Mark sat in the front seat, his aged hand on Luke's back, feeling each strong heartbeat pounding under that coarse fur. As if that heart was carrying not only memories of the past, but living for the present, too. The kennel emerged amid thick brush, rusted steel and cages long silent. But Luke didn't stop at the gate. He darted straight for a small storage shed, hidden behind the main row of buildings. Suddenly, he barked furiously, scratching hard at the door. The Special Forces team immediately fanned out, tightening the perimeter. Harper signaled. Everyone raised their weapons and prepared. Inside the shed, there was a commotion. Shadows frantically gathering papers, struggling with chemicals and files. The door was forced open, and the team stormed in. 8 men and women inside were trying to escape, and right in the suffocating center stood Alan Kramer, Deputy Chief of State Police, face ashen but still trying to look calm. Luke entered, let out a single resounding bark that froze everyone, and his sharp shepherd eyes locked on Kramer, recognizing an old enemy, a ghost from distant battlefields many years before. Just then, another officer discovered safes and secret filing cabinets behind a false wall. Dozens of files stamped in red. "Eliminate witness," along with toxic chemical vials, medical equipment, maps of Silver Creek, and lists of people who had worked with Mark and Luke on the operation years ago. It was all the evidence needed. Harper stepped up to Kramer, unable to hide her fury. "You once served with these people, yet you ordered their deaths just to cover your filthy past." Kramer trembled, unable to speak. In front of him, Luke growled softly, not with fear, but with cold determination, the kind only a K9 veteran carries, never bowing to any darkness. Within the hour, all 8 were arrested, including Alan Kramer. The files, toxic chemicals, and evidence of cover-up were sealed and sent to the barracks. The media quickly arrived on the scene, capturing images of Luke leading the team like a silent hero, as if he was the very soul of this operation. Back at the barracks, Mark knelt to embrace Luke, whispering with emotion. No one thought an old dog, a friend who almost died from a stray bullet, could bravely expose the truth and save an entire community from danger. Luke simply wagged his tail, his one bright eye shining with proud, unwavering resolve, as if to say, "As long as I breathe, I'll keep fighting for justice." And thanks to that unwavering loyalty, the shadows of the past were finally torn apart by the light of truth and the love between an old soldier and his voiceless K9 friend. The transport convoy carrying the 8 arrested suspects and the confidential files rolled out from the fake kennel, midday sunlight slicing through the Humvee windows, illuminating a day in Silver Creek that was unlike any other. But it wasn't just sunlight. Truth itself was now revealed, powerful and irreversible. Luke, the one-eyed shepherd, curled at Mark's feet on the floor of the vehicle, his ears still alert, as if guarding against danger even though the worst threat had passed. When the Special Operations Convoy returned to base, news of the dramatic takedown had already spread, not just statewide, but across borders. News outlets were saturated. Images of Luke barking in the warehouse, Mark kneeling beside his battle-scarred dog, these appeared everywhere. But the community's wave of emotion went beyond sympathy and outrage. What Luke had done ignited a national conversation about responsibility, honor, and loyalty. Virtues often found only in textbooks, or in the solemn oaths of those in uniform. Mark knew it was time to step into the light, not just for himself, but for all who had been hurt, for the K9S who had sacrificed silently on battlefields everywhere. When he received an invitation to speak before the state legislature, Mark didn't hesitate. Harper, in her dress uniform, and Luke, one bright eye and a back still marked with scars, accompanied him to the Capitol building amidst applause and the emotional gaze of a crowd. Before hundreds of lawmakers, journalists, and a live audience, Mark stood silent for a moment, his trembling hand resting on Luke's head, the dog sitting proudly at his side, every inch the warrior. Mark lifted his head, his voice deep but steady, each word resonating with everyone in the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, some people spend a lifetime talking about honor, but sometimes it takes a dog to teach us the true meaning of loyalty, resilience, and justice. Luke, my voiceless companion, is living proof of that." The chamber was silent. Mark spoke of 40 years of service, of nights he and Luke survived in the darkness of secret operations, of a fateful bullet and scars that never fully healed, of the moments he thought he'd lost his truest friend, only to realize, in those very moments, the most precious things: life, forgiveness, and the spirit to never give up. Luke has saved me from cowards, has pulled me back from despair and death, has endured pain just to remain by my side, even though I'm just an old soldier, someone long familiar with injustice. Today, he once again saved me, saved this very society, from a darkness that the most powerful tried to keep hidden. The chamber was hushed. Then whispers of emotion stirred. Mark's voice tightened as he continued. "We can build laws, write beautiful words about human rights, but if we don't learn from small beings like Luke, about honesty, loyalty, about fighting to the end for what is right, then all our oaths are empty." Harper looked at her father, pride shining in her eyes. Lawmakers wiped away tears. Some members of the National K9 Council stood, hands over their hearts in tribute. Outside, in the Great Hall, the crowd erupted in thunderous applause. Mark bowed his head, slowly reaching to stroke Luke's head. "Luke, you have fulfilled your duty more than any soldier I've ever known. Thank you, my silent hero." After the speech, the entire legislature rose in a standing ovation. It wasn't just for an old soldier, but for a warrior dog who had overcome every prejudice, every pain, to bring truth and hope to society. Across the news networks, images of Mark and Luke, a graying soldier and his one-eyed dog, became a new symbol of courage and the belief that justice is always lit by loving, unyielding hearts. That night, back in their room, Luke laid his head on Mark's leg and slept deeply, as if all worries had been left behind. In that peaceful sleep, he was still a voiceless friend, but a hero who made a whole nation pause and remember to live with kindness and courage, thanks to one old shepherd dog. After the stirring speech at the Capitol, Mark and Luke became symbols, not just for Silver Creek, but for the whole nation. They stood for courage, loyalty, and above all, the longing for justice that can overcome any wound, any barrier. Yet for all the media spotlights and endless hashtags echoing across social networks, the only place Mark truly wanted to return to was a quiet road winding through his hometown. A simple, peaceful place where he and Luke had spent so many years together. On the day they returned to Silver Creek, the sunlight was gentle, as if offering a special welcome. The convoy rolled slowly down Main Street. Harper sat behind the wheel beside her father, while Luke, now recovered, though his fur was still marked by scars and one eye bandaged, sat patiently in Mark's lap, carrying the dignified bearing of a dog who had weathered countless storms. But what awaited them along that familiar road was more moving than anything they could have expected. On either side of the street, nearly the entire town had quietly gathered. Old men with silver hair, housewives, schoolchildren in uniform, even the local shopkeepers Mark had known for years. Everyone left their work and stood at attention. There were no cheers, no wild applause, like the crowds outside the Capitol. Instead, as the car approached, each person bowed their head in silence, then looked up, eyes shining with respect and gratitude. Mark squeezed Harper's hand, not out of fear or embarrassment, but from an overwhelming surge of emotion, a feeling so unfamiliar after a lifetime of hardship and loss. Harper glanced over, her gaze filled with a pride she had never shown so clearly before. She gripped her father's hand tightly, passing on all the strength and love that only family can share in a moment like this. Luke, sensing the change in the air, raised himself up in Mark's lap. His ears pricked forward, nose pressed to the window, eager to drink in every familiar scent, every breeze from the town where he had once roamed by his master's side. It seemed as if all the pain, all the old memories, faded away, leaving only peace, a quiet pride shared between dog and man. As the convoy passed the little church, the bells began to ring, marking the significance of the moment for all of Silver Creek. A little girl stepped forward, holding a small sign that trembled in her hands. "Thank you, Luke." She looked at Mark with clear, bright eyes, then bowed deeply to the shepherd, innocent and reverent. Families along the route hung blue ribbons, symbols of hope and of the dogs who serve justice. No one spoke loudly. There were only warm smiles, tears of happiness rolling down cheeks, and silent handshakes sent through the car window to Mark and Luke. Mark had never imagined he would one day become the focus of such gratitude. In 40 years of military service, he had witnessed the most formal ceremonies, heard the loudest rounds of applause, but never had he felt so small and so surrounded by love. Harper spoke softly, barely more than a whisper. "Dad, today Silver Creek isn't just welcoming you home. They're welcoming a very special hero, too." Mark stroked Luke's back, tears slipping down his cheeks. "We're just 2 survivors, honey. But thanks to this dog, I know what it means to be forgiven, and to truly come home." When the car stopped in front of the old house, the crowd did not swarm forward or cheer. They simply stood back, giving Mark and Luke a moment of privacy, so Mark could gently open the door, lift Luke into his arms, and carry him outside. The embrace between man and dog needed no words, just a softly wagging tail, a tender lick on the hand, and the slow, steady breathing of peace. On the steps, Mark sat with Luke in his arms, Harper beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. The three of them, 2 generations and 1 dog, looked out over the sunlit street where Silver Creek had opened its arms to welcome them as the town's most cherished family. The story of loyalty, honor, courage, and forgiveness. From this day on, it became the most beautiful memory of the little town, and for everyone who had followed the journey of Mark and Luke, the silent shepherd, who spoke for so many loving hearts in this world. After returning to Silver Creek, Mark thought his and Luke's journey would finally close in the peace of their old home. Yet just then, another honor, one beyond all imagining, came knocking. News of the brave shepherd and his compassionate, steadfast owner had spread across America, even crossing borders, making them a new symbol of loyalty and living proof that kindness and silent sacrifice are always worthy of recognition. On that crisp autumn morning, as Mark poured a fresh pot of coffee and prepared Luke's breakfast, Harper received an unexpected call from Washington. On the other end was a representative from the office of the President of the United States, their voice formal but brimming with emotion. The President and First Lady would like to invite Mr. Mark Calloway and his dog Luke to the White House to present the Canine Valor Medal in honor of Luke's extraordinary bravery and service beyond all danger. Mark was stunned silent, looking down at Luke, gently licking his fingers, his one good eye shining with that undying, loyal light. Harper placed a hand on her father's shoulder, smiling at the steady nod of a man who'd led countless missions, but who, this time, was going not as a commander, but as a father and a friend to the dog who'd changed his life. On the day of the ceremony, the skies above the Capitol were a perfect blue. The White House did not just welcome politicians that day, but also 2 ordinary souls, a veteran and his silent shepherd. As their car pulled up to the red carpet, journalists, guests, soldiers, children, and regular citizens all watched each step Mark and Luke took. A wave of applause greeted Luke's arrival, his coat still bearing scars, but his stride proud, the very image of a true warrior. Mark gripped the leash firmly, nodding in greeting to all, while Luke wagged his tail, his single eye fixed calmly ahead. Not afraid, not boastful, just a dog always ready to protect his owner. Inside the dignified East Room, the strains of the national anthem played softly. Before hundreds of witnesses, the President approached with a gleaming Canine Valor Medal in hand. Smiling at Mark, the President knelt, gently placing the medal around Luke's neck. The entire hall erupted in applause. The President then spoke. "Today we honor a hero, not a man, but a dog. Yet this dog has reminded us of the greatest values of America: loyalty, courage, sacrifice, and the spirit to never give up." Luke overcame pain and prejudice, standing to protect his owner, his team, even the truth and justice our society sometimes forgets. Mark could not hold back his tears. He knelt and hugged Luke, his silent friend. He whispered, voice trembling with pride, "Never have I been prouder of you than in this moment, Luke." Luke raised his head and licked Mark's hand gently, as if he understood every word, every shared memory, every unbreakable bond between them. Harper, seated in the front row, let her tears fall, though her smile was brighter than ever, witnessing a moment of recognition not just for her dog, but for the struggles and triumphs of all who serve, both on 2 legs and 4. All of America watched that ceremony. Luke's image was broadcast live, becoming a new symbol of resilience and honesty. Photos of Mark embracing Luke, the President solemnly bowing before the one-eyed shepherd, flooded the news, social media, and the hearts of millions. But for Mark, the greatest honor was not the lights of the White House or a shining medal. It was the moment he saw Luke, his truest companion, embraced and loved by the world. He whispered again, softly, just for Luke. "We made it, old warrior. Now it's time to rest, to live out your days in peace, worthy of the love and honor you've brought to us all." On that day of glory, Mark knew their story would live on, not just in headlines, but in the hearts of all who believe that love and loyalty are the greatest miracles this life can offer. After the grand ceremony at the White House, life for Mark, Harper, and Luke slowly returned to its gentle rhythm. Quiet mornings over coffee, peaceful strolls around the small town of Silver Creek, and long, silent nights where Mark always felt the warmth and steady breath of his four-legged friend by his side. But the story of the brave shepherd lived on, not only in the Calloway family's memory, but became a wellspring of inspiration for millions across the country. The government, animal welfare groups, and the Veterans Association came together to organize a special event, the unveiling of the Four-Legged Soldier Memorial at the National Police Academy. It was the first monument in the United States to honor a rescue dog, a companion who overcame prejudice, bullets, and danger to protect his owner and the truth, proving that loyalty and courage can change society itself. On the day of the unveiling, the autumn sky was a brilliant blue. Hundreds of officers, young cadets, veterans, and townsfolk gathered on the Academy's sprawling lawn. A white cloth shrouded the sculpture. Everyone waited breathlessly for the moment it would be revealed. Mark and Harper arrived simply, dressed in everyday clothes, walking beside Luke. Though now with only one shining eye, the shepherd had regained his strong gait. Fur had grown back around his old wounds. His ears were always alert, and, most notably, the tiny pair of sunglasses Mark had given him sat neatly on Luke's nose, an unbreakable symbol of optimism and pride. As solemn music filled the air, Harper gently placed a hand on her father's shoulder. Together, they took Luke's leash and led him towards the veiled statue. Each of Mark's purposeful steps, each confident wag of Luke's tail, was followed in reverent silence. No one wanted to miss a single moment. The master of ceremonies read aloud the inscription on the bronze plaque beside the statue. Luke, the soldier who never surrendered, a symbol of loyalty, courage, and justice. At that moment, Mark and Harper pulled away the cloth. The bronze statue emerged in the golden sunlight. An old man astride a classic Harley, his face marked by time, his eyes set on the horizon. Behind him stood Luke, upright, head held high, ears perked, mouth slightly open, and his signature sunglasses gleaming. One of Luke's front paws rested lightly on a step modeled after Silver Creek's streets, as if forever ready to run to his master's side. In that moment, many young cadets bowed their heads in emotion, seasoned officers wiped away tears, and excited children took turns snapping pictures with the dog in sunglasses, the shepherd who, without words, had spoken for so many. Mark stood silently for a long time before the statue, one hand gripping his old jacket, the other gently rubbing Luke's back. He didn't need to say anything. Every feeling was already there, in the warmth of his eyes and every slow, steady breath of the old dog beside him. Harper stood by, smiling with pride at her father and Luke, knowing this monument was not just a reminder of the past, but a message for generations to come. Never underestimate even the smallest life, because with enough faith, courage, and loyalty, anyone can be a hero. At the foot of the statue, lines of police cadets placed white flowers, a symbol of the pure ideals of justice. Some lingered, quietly laying their hands on Luke's bronze paw, a silent promise, to always act for the truth, never to shrink before evil, never to bow to injustice. Before leaving, Mark whispered into Luke's ear, "You wrote history, Luke. Not just mine, but for everyone who's never been heard. You are the proof that a four-legged soldier can save humanity." Luke answered only with a gentle lick to Mark's hand, ears perked to the music, tail wagging softly, as if ready for whatever journey lay ahead. From that day on, the bronze statue stood quietly beneath the flag, watching over new generations of police and soldiers passing by, carrying the story of Mark, Harper, and Luke, the four-legged soldier who never surrendered. And from that day on, the people of Silver Creek, all of America, and everyone who has ever loved an animal would always remember the story of a dog who taught people what honor, justice, and unwavering loyalty truly mean. The story of Mark Calloway and his loyal dog, Luke, may have come to an end, but its meaning continues to echo in each of our hearts. Luke's loyalty, courage, and silent faith didn't just save one man. They transformed an entire community and inspired us all to reconsider the true value of friendship, justice, and compassion. Have you ever witnessed a dog, or any four-legged friend, change the world around them simply through their devotion? We'd love to hear your feelings or stories in the comments below. Who knows? Your experience might just be the encouragement someone out there needs. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share with your friends, and subscribe for more moving tales about the powerful bonds between people and their canine companions. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this special journey.